โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. When Luang Por Chah went to the UK for the first time, there's something he wrote in his diary which is quite interesting. There was an incident on the plane. I think it was Thai Airways that flew him and Ajahn Pabakaro, his attendant monk, out of Bangkok, and they went to Pakistan for a stopover and then on to Europe. And I think when the plane was taking off, one of the wheels burst. And so that was a very great concern to the air crew. So when they were landing, they had to prepare for an emergency landing. And they warned all the passengers of what had happened, and they had to take precautions and stow all the luggage, and people took their shoes off and strapped themselves in, put themselves in the brace position, I think. And Ajahn Chah even had to take his false teeth out because of the risk. And on the ground in the airport there were fire engines and ambulances and helicopters, all kinds of emergency vehicles ready. And Luang Por Chah said he sat meditation. He sat cross-legged on his seat. And he said the first thing he did was to offer his life to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. There's a phrase in Thai, they say, "Mob Gai Thawai Chivit." So you offer your life to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And then he entered a deep state of samadhi and spread metta. And he said afterwards that entering samadhi, he saw that there probably wasn't any real danger. Nevertheless, he stayed in that state until the plane landed, and it did land safely and no one was hurt. But it's just interesting, and what did Ajahn Chah do in that situation? He offered his life to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. That's a sign that his mind and the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha were one. You might say this is what we're aiming for in our practice, to bring up that very strong, we say unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha as a starting point for our practice. It's not the whole practice, but it's the starting point where you're inclining your mind to take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And immediately usually brings up very wholesome mental states, can bring up piti and sukha, joy, rapture, happiness. Just that intention to take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha already can expel, push away many negative thoughts. If you're in a situation where you might be tempted to be afraid, then it pushes that away. And you're setting your mind on the intention to practice and cultivate the Eightfold Noble Path. So to keep sila, to restrain body and speech, to bring up right effort, right mindfulness, cultivate samadhi, states of samadhi, and develop right view, insight into the Four Noble Truths. This is the Buddhist path, and you're dedicating resolving to practice that path when you take refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And it's such a powerful mental aspiration. We can really develop it every day as a regular practice, at least once a day. Just to bring your mind to take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, set your mind on its goal. Today in the monastery there was a young man who was asking questions about how to deal with boredom, which is a perennial problem. We all have to deal with that thought, that mood. In a simple way, when you face a mood of boredom, whether it's during meditation and Dhamma practice or any other aspect of life, literally you could let go of the thought of boredom. The very words, I am bored, if you're mindful enough, can catch that mood, you can let it go. But there's a lot we can learn from the feeling of boredom, the experience of boredom. So once you have taken refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, then whatever it is that comes up in your mind, you can say becomes part of your practice, something to learn from. The experiences we have with the world around us and how we're interacting with it, and then our own mind. So what did the Buddha say about boredom? Well, he pointed out that this world we live in, as a human being, it's what we call the Gama Vachara, it's sensual realm. As a human being we have our 5 physical senses, and then we have the mind, the 6th sense. And our habit is to always seek stimulation of these senses, ideally pleasurable stimulation, pleasant, agreeable objects and experiences, and we try to get rid of the unpleasant ones. But one thing you notice as you practice more, develop more awareness and this ability to reflect back on your experience and understand it more deeply from a place of calm, is that sense objects and the senses we have, they can't be constantly stimulated and bring us constant pleasure. It's not possible. And so we do fall prey to boredom, restlessness, agitation, discontent regularly. Some people think it's a modern disease or problem, we have more things to attach to and stimulate us now, more technology, smartphones, conveniences, gadgets, games, entertainments, information, and so on. So people often say, it's the modern illness. But I remember when I was a kid, I'd get bored, and I don't think it has changed in that sense. Since as long as there's been people in the world, then people have been getting bored. It may be slightly heightened by the addiction to technology and so on in this day and age, but as an experience, it's nothing new. But really, it's the limitation of living in a sensual realm. You can't constantly have pleasant experiences, pleasant sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. You can't always be stimulated intellectually or have nice ideas and beautiful thoughts, or thoughts that bring you pleasure and satisfy you. It's just not possible. That's the limitation of the realm we live in. So taking refuge in the Buddha, you take on the Buddha's wisdom and then you're investigating it and looking in to see what the Buddha taught and whether it's true. And he pointed out, this sensual realm we live in is limited in that sense. Ajahn Chah used to say, get your favourite food and just eat it all the time. Normally we have a favourite food or various foods that we consider our favourite, and we'll have them from time to time, so each time we have it we get excited and stimulated, or even just the thought of it, we get saliva in our mouth and the anticipation can be overwhelming sometimes. I even saw a man once crying in expectation of eating his chili curry in Thailand. But if you have that food that you really like every day, morning, middle of the day, night, for every meal, and nothing else, well, gradually your taste buds get used to it. They'll start to become numb to it and be bored. Maybe even in the long run you become so fed up with that food that you don't even want it anymore. Not only is it boring, but it actually becomes almost like painful and difficult to eat, perhaps. And the nature of our senses are like that. After a while, the stimulation gets less and less. The pleasure you get from whatever it is you like gets less and less. You listen to the same bit of music over and over again. After a while, you've had enough. You don't want it. You watch the same movie over and over again. After a while, you couldn't watch it anymore. It's too boring. You know everything about it. You know every line, every scene, so you don't want to watch it anymore. And really our life is like that. It starts when we're a kid. We have toys and we think they're the best things in the world, but then after a while we get bored with our old toys and look for new ones. And that process continues through our life, doesn't it? Because the nature of sensual existence is that our senses can't constantly bring us the highest, most intense kind of pleasure. So we're always looking for more pleasure, more intense pleasure, but they can't provide that. So we do get bored with things that we're used to, things we know. So we're looking for new things, new experiences all the time. But at the same time, if you understand what's happening, you're seeing that process, how your senses are getting used to a certain kind of stimulation. That understanding helps you deal with boredom, doesn't it? It's just the fact that you're not getting as much pleasure and satisfaction than you did before. So the mind is less interested, less content. So for some people that actually is a cause for them to turn to the practice of meditation. It's one of the first things I was noticing when I was learning meditation is how easily we do become bored with things in the world, things that, temporarily satisfy us, excite us, interest us, and then after a while they don't. But then when you practice meditation and you're turning your attention inwards, even though it's hard work quite often and you have to be patient with your mind, you realize there's also this, you're opening up to a whole inner world of happiness on a slightly deeper and better level, you could say, a superior kind of happiness that comes from actually letting go of a lot of that desire and attachment that underlies boredom. We get bored because we're attaching to our senses and the experiences we're having, and they get dull, they get numb, they get used to things. But as you turn your attention inwards to a meditation object, you're letting go of that whole sensual realm little by little and bringing up mindfulness and wholesome states of mind as you cultivate the path. Maybe even just thinking of the Buddha, recollecting the Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha, brings up a whole inner happiness, and all your normal interest or even obsession with the senses disappears. So many people's first experience in samadhi and meditation is what we call a faith experience, where you hear a Dhamma talk or meet a teacher or remember the Buddha or do some chanting, and it's enough to stimulate a very powerful feeling of faith, and the hindrances to samadhi, the distractions, the dullness, the restlessness, and particularly the sensual desire is all temporarily abandoned through the arising of faith in a very wholesome mind state. It might not last that long, but it's enough to give you a taste of the inner happiness of the peaceful mind, and then to be able to see that the sensual happiness is only just that much. It can't bring us lasting satisfaction. our senses can only be stimulated, occupied for so long. And we will get bored with things. But you notice as you're developing mindfulness on the inside, boredom just becomes another mental object to observe, understand and let go. And it can even become interesting to look at boredom as a mental object, a mental state. So then really the experience of of boredom as a state of mind, as a feeling, starts to fade. So many people find this once you start practicing meditation regularly and you have a certain inner joy coming up from this practice of letting go of the attachment to the external senses. That inner joy keeps returning. Sometimes it's intense and profound, sometimes it's very fleeting, sometimes not that intense, but it's there in the background. And the sensual world and its attractions and all that it has on offer become slightly less enticing over time. Particularly when you merge both the state of calm, inner happiness and joy from meditation with wisdom, with developing vipassana, insight into the three characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, or we say anicca, dukkha, anatta. The mind actually, the wisdom seeing the nature of the sensual world as impermanent, not self, unsatisfactory, it's turning away from it, less fascinated, less entranced, less hooked. It's not so tempting. They say like the fish, that's tempted by the worm on the hook. It's not so tempted anymore, so it doesn't get stuck on the hook. Our mind is like that; it turns away. There's a word for this in the Buddha's teaching. It's nibbida, where the mind becomes skillfully bored, spiritually bored or wisely bored with the objects of the world, knowing that they are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. Sometimes people mistake this quality of being bored or turning away, losing interest in the fascination with sense objects. They mistake it for aversion. When you've been disappointed with things, or you've seen your attachment and then you've let go, or it's passed by, or the thing you had, you lost it. And the mind can go to aversion. You say, I'm fed up with the world. It wasn't as good as I thought, or the thing I wanted, I've lost it now, and I'm just fed up. I don't want to chase after it anymore. It's quite common for people to say that, I'm fed up with the world. I don't want to live anymore. I just want nibbana. I don't want to be reborn again. But often this is not true nibbida. It's not true disenchantment and turning away from the world. It's more just a reaction maybe born out of frustration or aversion, disappointment. So one has to watch this as we practice, learn to recognize the difference between just aversion towards the world and a true turning away from the world, seeing its true colours, seeing the true characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactory and not self. But this is where the mind really finds peace, by not grasping and running after sense objects anymore, not being fascinated by them or lost in them. As long as you're a living, breathing human being, you're still sensing things. So you still eat food and you still live in this world and interact with people and do many things. But what's changing is the attitude of the mind, the view of the mind towards oneself, the body, and the objects of the world. And we call this nibbida, disenchantment. And sometimes it's just temporary, that might come up in meditation. Sometimes it comes up after meditation, where having experienced a sense of letting go and peace on the inside, then you go back and maybe you get involved with the world again in different way, through entertainments or socializing or just various activities that you're normally involved with, but your attitude towards them may slightly change as nibbida might arise. So things that you used to find very exciting, stimulating, and maybe not so exciting, not so stimulating, sometimes completely lose interest altogether. But again, this is not aversion. It's not the same as someone who's saying depressed, unhappy. It's more just seeing through, or seeing on a deeper level, the limitations, the temporary nature of any pleasure that you get from those things. So it could be like, a sport you used to really be into, and then gradually that interest wears out, or music, or some action, some activity, watching certain types of movies or playing certain games. Your mind is gradually wearing out, just like a kid wears out their interest in certain toys, and after a while never picks those toys up again. They're no longer interesting, even though once they filled the mind with excitement. And when you're a kid, your imagination is so vivid, and your mind is so open and new to the world, learning things. One simple toy can occupy you all day long and bring you great happiness. And then later on, you just cast it aside and you never want to pick it up again. Nibbida is like this. As you come out of meditation, sometimes you have this sense of just being bored with things that previously you weren't bored with. So what does your mind pick up then? Well, it picks up that knowledge, but it's an understanding of it as part of the path. And it's balanced and supported by an inner peace, an inner contentment coming from this inner joy, of the joy of letting go, renunciation, seeing clearly the way things are. So you don't go to a state of sort of emptiness where you're just seeing everything as empty, of not enjoyable anymore. The world is just empty, and you go to a state of depression and feel very kind of lost or empty, as though life has no meaning. It's not like that. Nibbida is balanced and supported by many other wholesome factors. Faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, wholesome qualities such as mindfulness, the sense of peace that comes with that, the sense of compassion also, compassion for oneself, compassion for others. So another factor of nibbida when it arises is you don't tend to be, it doesn't tend to stimulate conceit, where you're looking down on all these other poor people who are still attached to the world, or all these poor people, and maybe thinking critically of them or looking down at them disparagingly. It's more compassion. You understand you also have this tendency to attach and get lost to the world, but maybe at this moment nibbida arises, so you're setting aside some of that attachment, whereas some other people or around you haven't done that yet, but you understand why, and you understand where they're at. So it's not like you have aversion for the world. You just understand that you personally at that moment have seen the three characteristics more clearly than usual, so you're naturally turning away from things that you used to be interested in or would find absorbing, fascinating, desirable. I remember not long before I went to Thailand to become a monk, I was out with a lot of my friends. I was a student, and what the students do, they go to bars, and you go to a bar for a drink and a chat. It's generally an enjoyable time, but I was already meditating quite a lot. I'd already set my mind on becoming a monk, and I had this experience sitting in a bar with all my friends, and my mind just went really quiet, because I was meditating regularly by then, and had no enjoyment. I'd already given up drinking, so I'd just drink an orange juice or a Coca-Cola or something, and I just had no interest to engage. Or when you're in a bar, often the conversation is often very frivolous and not that beneficial, not that meaningful, just passing the time. So I didn't have aversion for anyone, they were all my friends, but I just had no interest in the whole situation. The mind just was happy being inside itself. And I remember that because it was a new experience for me, so I really remember it coming up. And it's just like the body was there, but the mind wasn't there. I think some of my friends noticed, and they said, "Oh, you're not much fun tonight." So yeah, on the social level, it isn't much fun when nibbida arises, but it's actually spiritual progress. It's progress towards seeing clearly the way things are, and sometimes it has to be like that. And things that you used to be interested in no longer interest you because you see them as not the way out of suffering, or they're actually the way into suffering, aren't they? The things you attach to bring you more suffering. You're not so easily excited by things, stimulated by things, so perhaps your emotions balanced out a little bit more. You don't have so many highs, but then you don't have so many lows either. It was like that with many things. Another friend complained, he said, "Oh, you used to really be into football, soccer. I used to go, when I was a kid, I'd go and watch soccer every week, play it, find it stimulating. But then after a while, as starting meditating, it's like I could still use it for exercise, but the emotions, that kind of extra emotional interest had gone because meditation was much better." So a friend noticed that. He said, "You're not into soccer anymore, are you?" I said, "No, meditation's more interesting, more fun in that sense, more satisfying." So many things are like that. And it may not be permanent. You have times when your mind loses its nibbida, unless one is really advanced along the path. Maybe an Arya Pugala doesn't lose their nibbida, but an ordinary practitioner, it may come and go. So you have periods where you sort of doubt again, because an unenlightened person is still subject to doubt, uncertainty about the path. The path of practice is not yet fully established in the mind. So you might go back trying to get a last bit of fun out of the world, go back to some previous things that you found pleasurable, stimulating, and so on. But if you keep up your meditation, it can't. The old way of thinking and enjoying things changes, and you can't really go back and enjoy things quite in the same way as before. Things can still be pleasurable, but it's the attitude, the sense of self, ownership. It changes. Sometimes, as I said, very gradually, slowly, sometimes quite quick. But even if you go back, it's like, oh, it's not the same as before, which can be frustrating. But really, you have to turn that back into stimulation for further practice. So you say, oh, yeah, all those enjoyments and some of the ambition for the world, some of the excitement with getting things, being somebody, going places, some of the magic has gone. But then you balance that by developing inner awareness, the happiness that comes from a peaceful mind, and then from wisdom, understanding of the way things are. And so, if all the factors of the path, sila, samadhi, panya, are coming together, then the mind doesn't doubt anymore, or doubts less and less. So, yes, the world is not such an attractive place because you see the limitations of it. So this quality of nibbida arises out of our practice, reflecting on the Buddha, sometimes just remembering the Buddha. The Buddha had this very experience himself. He left the palace, went out into the forest. And you can imagine if he was somebody brought up in a wealthy family with power, with all the best things of life, good friends, every kind of comfort, how on earth did he leave that behind? Voluntarily, nobody forced him to do that. It's because the mind was developing something better on the inside. The inner joy, peace, and then the wisdom. All of this combines to bring up a lot of rapture, happiness, and the peace of a mind that is not fooled or deluded by the world. Non-delusion is a state where the mind is not confused, not doubting, it's clear, and it's steady. So that this unshakable nature of the mind that comes from the practice of sila, samadhi, panya is a much more desirable state of mind than just the pleasures of the world, all the success that success and ambition can bring you in the world. It's good, but it doesn't last. The worldly happiness doesn't last, whereas the unshakable mind of Sila Samadhi Panya does. But you have to prove that to yourself. You don't even have to prove it to other people, you just have to prove it to yourself through your own practice. So little by little, as you practice, you are proving it. But you have to be ready for the fact that, as nibbida arises, your mind is turning away from some of its former attachments. It's less fascinated, less interested. But it's a natural spiritual progression. It's not something you can force either. You can't just force yourself not to want or like the things of the world, not to get obsessed with them or attached, but it comes naturally through clear seeing of the way things are. Clear focusing the mind on the impermanent nature of sense pleasure, the objects of the mind, the impermanent nature of life itself. All the best that life can bring you is impermanent, inconstant, it doesn't last. Seeing that brings wisdom, and that wisdom brings its own joy, the happiness of renunciation, letting go, turning away. And this is what the Buddha experienced. So it is helpful to keep coming back to taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, because it brings you back to that starting point, kind of brightens the mind, energizes the mind, but then you have to practice. You kind of step out from that point, and through your own practice you're proving what the Buddha said. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily, as I said, you don't have to look down on people who are still enjoying the world or disparage them, or be critical of them, but you just know the way things are. And you can, if they are successful, happy, finding happiness, well, you can be happy for them. But your own mind is, you might say, maturing out of that. Just as a kid discards its toy, your mind starts to discard some of its attachment to the sensual realm. The meditative states of mind, the peace and the insight and clarity become more attractive, more desirable. I mean, that still can be a source of suffering, as we know. We want insight, we want blissful states of mind, we want a mind that is not caught up in obsessive thinking and worrying and restlessness. So, the more subtle spiritual attainments can also become a source of attachment. But little by little, your mind is getting the point. If you keep reflecting on this as you practice, it gets the point. Nothing is to be clung to as self. Nothing is to be attached to or identified with as self, because none of it will last. The sense of self is a construct, just like the feeling of I am bored, that mood, that thought. It's a mental formation that arises and ceases, and if you can see that and see through that with mindfulness and wisdom, well, then it doesn't bother you so much. So most people are practicing regularly, and particularly for many years, often they don't get bored anymore. It doesn't mean to say they're not in situations where they're not potentially bored, where they have to wait long periods for things, or do sort of repetitive tasks that you might call boring. It's just they're now focused on their mind and learning from each experience. Everything becomes a teacher, even boring experiences. So monastic life teaches you that. Monastic life involves a lot of routines, doing things, the same old thing every day. You eat your same old meal in the same old bowl, one meal a day, silently eating your meal. And you do that every day of your life as a monk. So you could say on the outside it looks boring. Same clothes, same hairstyle, same bowl, same dwelling place, same kind of environment, same sort of activities, chant the same blessings, the same reflections, meditate on the breath, in-breath, out-breath, same. On the outside, monastic life looks boring, which is why there's so few monastics in the world. There's not many monks and nuns in the world as a percentage, because it doesn't look boring, exciting, doesn't look like it's going to bring you ultimate happiness. But like many things, you have to taste it, don't you? Practicing Dhamma is something you have to taste for yourself. I could sit here explaining all this to you all night long, how good it is, how much happiness it will bring you, but you have to try it in order to know, don't you? You can't explain it. And certainly something as full on as living in a monastery, say as a monk or a nun, with the discipline, the meditation, the simplicity, very difficult to put that into words. So by the standards of the world, the life of a Buddhist monk seems very boring, not very interesting, but if you try it, things change. Your mind opens up and you realize, actually, you have lots of opportunities to learn new things, learn about yourself, learn about your mind, experience aspects of the human mind that maybe in normal life you might very rarely have the opportunity to experience. Certainly levels of happiness, deep peace, levels of samadhi, quite difficult to achieve in the lay life, but not impossible. But really you have to try it, don't you? Learn for yourself through your own experience. As Ajahn Chah used to say, you can describe what an apple or a mango is like to somebody, or one of those more exotic fruits. Like I used to live at Ajahn Anand's monastery and we get a lot of durian there. It's in a durian orchard. You try to explain durian to your relatives in another country, what it is, they just don't get it. The only way really is they have to come and taste it for themselves and see it for themselves. The Dhamma is like that. It's something you have to experience, practice, and know for yourself. We say, Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi. We have that phrase when we do the chanting. It means that the wise know for themselves, individually for themselves. Even recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and our teachers, although that's a very wholesome thought and it stimulates us in a good way, they can't actually transfer their own experience of wisdom, of peace to us. You get a sort of an inclination of it by reflecting and remembering, recollecting them, but you have to do the practice yourself and experience the inner peace of letting go, seeing the impermanent nature of things, your mind turning away from that, disenchanted, experiencing the inner peace of letting go. You have to do that for yourself. It's not something one person can transfer to another. They can only encourage and guide and stimulate through teaching and good example, but they can't actually do it for you. We have to do it for ourselves. One of the benefits of the practice is that, as you do practice, you do develop this inner joy, inner peace, rapture. We can dedicate that to others, so we can spread metta to people, and you'll notice when you're more peaceful and you think of others, it does seem to be quite a powerful thought. Sometimes it can seem to have effect on people around you when you think of them, or we also practice transferring merit to the dead. So we can do what we can as we experience more peace, the peace of letting go, the peaceful mind. We can dedicate it to others, share it with others. But first we have to develop it for ourselves through the practice. So maybe for tonight I'll just give you this much teaching, but we'll also open up for the opportunity to have any questions and try and answer them for you.